Imagine a country where um, over 90% of the money comes from people just sitting at desks.
Right. No factories.
Exactly. Practically zero factories left. The farms are just quietly disappearing,
Yeah.
and nobody is having children anymore, but the population keeps growing.
Which is a wild paradox when you first look at it.
It really is. And on top of that, everyone is living longer than almost anywhere else on Earth. Plus, you look around this place, and there's almost no informal labor.
Yeah. No gig workers.
Right. No gig workers struggling on the margins. Just this endless sea of highly paid professionals, wealth managers, and corporate administrators.
I mean, honestly, it sounds like a science fiction premise, like a
Uh,
society that has just completely decoupled itself from physical production.
It does.
Yeah.
But it's not science fiction at all.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
not some theoretical model cooked up in a university's basement somewhere either.
No, it's very real.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Today we are looking at the ultimate economic endgame. And it is happening right now.
It's a fascinating case study.
It really is. We have this sweeping, intensely detailed macro analysis we're unpacking today. And it spans from 1960 all the way up to 2024.
A massive data set.
Huge. And we aren't looking at some sprawling superpower with a billion people. We are focusing on the Channel Islands.
Specifically, the micro islands of Guernsey and Jersey.
Right. Nestled right there in the English Channel. Looking at the cover slide of this presentation we're working from, it sets a really stark academic tone. Just this clean, white background with a minimalist data line chart.
It signals right away that we are dealing with hard macroeconomic realities here.
Yeah. And from an analytical perspective, these islands are basically the perfect laboratory.
They really are, because, when you try to diagnose the economic health of a massive nation, say the US or China, the data gets incredibly noisy.
For sure. So many variables.
Exactly. You have regional disparities, sprawling land borders, complex internal migrations. But an island provides a totally contained ecosystem.
Right. It's a closed loop, mostly. And we have this massive stack of demographic and economic data sourced directly from the World Bank and the United Nations.
Which is the gold standard for this kind of macro analysis.
Absolutely. But we are not just going to read rows of spreadsheet data at you today.
No, that would be incredibly dry.
We are going to reconstruct the biography of an economy. Now, you might be listening to this, maybe sitting in a major industrial hub somewhere, wondering why a pair of tiny islands even matters to you.
It's a fair question.
It matters because the Channel Islands are a crystal ball. They represent a high-income, hyper-specialized endpoint.
The structural realities hitting them right now are coming for everyone else.
Yeah. Deep systemic aging, the absolute dominance of the service sector, the literal outsourcing of their physical survival. That is coming to a developed nation near you.
It is the trajectory of almost every high-income nation today, just accelerated and compressed into a few hundred square miles.
Right. If you want to understand the policy battles, the labor shortages, the economic friction that Europe, North America, and parts of East Asia will face over the next 50 years.
You absolutely have to understand what happened here over the last 60.
Okay, let's unpack this. Slide 2 of our report really lays out the executive summary. It highlights 3 core pillars.
Right. A population stepping into profound aging, an economy mutating to survive that aging, and the high per capita income that comes with it.
Yeah. And I think we need to start with the human foundation. Because before you have GDP, before you have trade deficits, you have people.
You cannot separate macroeconomic reality from demographic destiny.
I love that phrase, demographic destiny.
It's true, though. The physical makeup of a population dictates what that economy is physically capable of doing.
So let's look at the growth curve. Slide 3 shows this really clear 2D area chart. Over the last 60 years, the total population of the Channel Islands has steadily expanded.
Right, starting from about 110,000 back in the early 60s.
Yeah, and it's just a clean, stable, upward slope since then. On the surface, that sounds like your standard post-war success story, right? More people, more growth, everything is fine.
On the surface, sure, but the devil is entirely in the composition of that growth.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that raw population number is masking a fundamental internal collapse of the traditional family structure.
Collapse is definitely the right word. If we jump to slide 5, there's this bar chart showing the crude birth rate.
And it is a steep drop.
Yeah, there's literally a giant downward-pointing arrow on the slide to emphasize it. In the early years of our data set, the Channel Islands had a robust birth rate of about 15.4 per 1,000 people.
which is a very healthy replacement level dynamic.
Well, fast forward to the modern era, and that number doesn't just decline, it falls off a cliff.
It drops down to a mere 8.2 per 1,000 people.
Wait, 8.2, that's nearly cut in half.
Exactly. The society essentially stopped having children at scale.
Now, the data shows us the what, but we really need to talk about the why. Why does a wealthy, stable, safe society suddenly cut its birth rate in half?
It's a convergence of incredibly powerful socioeconomic forces. First, you have to look at the cost of space.
Real estate.
Right. On a highly developed island, real estate is finite, and it's fiercely protected by zoning laws.
Which makes sense. You can't just keep sprawling out into the ocean.
Exactly. And as the economy shifted toward high-end financial services, property values just skyrocketed.
So supply and demand on steroids.
Completely. When a standard three-bedroom family home costs what it does in Jersey or Guernsey, the sheer financial barrier to starting a large family becomes insurmountable for a significant portion of a population.
Right. If you are a young couple, you are doing the math. You look at the mortgage, you look at the cost of imported groceries, because everything has to be imported,
Right.
and you realize that a third child, or even a second child, totally breaks the financial model of your household.
Precisely. And alongside the housing crisis, you have the labor market dynamics.
How so?
Well, when your economy demands high levels of education and highly competitive long-hour professional service jobs, the opportunity cost of stepping out of the workforce to raise children becomes massive.
I see.
The penalty to your career trajectory, particularly for women in a hyper-competitive financial hub, is severe.
So people delay.
Yeah. Marriages happen later, first children are born later, and the overall fertility window shrinks.
It's a paradox, isn't it? The wealthier the society becomes, the more expensive it is to actually live in it, and the fewer children the citizens can afford to have.
It is the ultimate modern paradox.
But here's the other side of that demographic coin. While the birth rates were plummeting, life expectancy was absolutely soaring.
The numbers are staggering.
Slide 6 has this great dumbbell plot comparing the early data to the latest. Overall, life expectancy at birth in the Channel Islands rose from 72.5 years all the way up to 81.1 years.
And there's a significant gender gap there, too.
Yeah, women are now living to an average of 83.2 years, and men to 79.0.
That leap in life expectancy is the hallmark of advanced public health, exceptional medical infrastructure, and a high-income lifestyle.
Right, it's a huge achievement.
But economically, it creates what demographers call the crossing of the dependency lines.
Okay, let's break down that concept for the listener, because slide 4 actually visualizes this exact crossing with a big red circle where the lines intersect. What exactly is a dependency ratio, and why is it crossing?
Sure. So a dependency ratio is a way of measuring the economic pressure on the working age population.
Okay.
Think of a society as having three main groups: children, working adults, and retirees.
Got it.
The adults in the middle are the engine. They generate the GDP, they pay the bulk of the income taxes, and their labor keeps the physical and administrative wheels turning.
They're carrying the load.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Now, the youth dependency ratio measures the percentage of children relying on that working group for schooling, pediatric care, daily support. And the elderly dependency ratio measures the retirees relying on that same working group for pensions, geriatric health care, and social infrastructure.
So mapping our data onto that, the youth dependency ratio fell sharply, right? From 32% down to 21.5%.
Yes. Because of the plunging birth rates we just talked about, there are far fewer children per working adult.
But the elderly dependency ratio did the exact opposite.
Right. Because everyone is living into their 80s, that ratio skyrocketed from around 20% to over 30.45%.
Wow, over 30%.
Yeah. So if you visualize this, like the slide does with the double line graph,
Yeah.
you have the line representing children plunging downward and the line representing the elderly sharply rising.
They intersect.
They intersect, forming an X on the graph. That's the crossing point.
The moment those lines cross, the entire structure of the society changes.
Fundamentally.
Think of it like a luxury cruise ship. This ship is sailing on calm waters, the buffet is incredible, the rooms are pristine.
Nice.
Right. But a few decades into the journey, management quietly stops letting kids on board.
Okay.
At the same time, the medical facility on the ship gets so advanced that the adult passengers just keep living longer and longer. Everyone is aging gracefully on the Lido deck.
But eventually,
Eventually, you have to look around and ask, Who was actually shoveling coal into the engine?
Right.
Who was cooking the meals in the galley? How does an economy function when the demographic pyramid is completely inverted?
It creates a fierce tension between what we call the longevity dividend and aging pressure.
Longevity dividend.
I like
That term.
Yeah, living to 83 in good health is a triumph. That is the longevity
All
dividend.
right, it's a good thing.
It is. But the aging pressure is the cold, hard math of labor. When 30% of your population is of retirement age and your incoming youth cohort is shrinking, you no longer have the physical bodies to sustain labor-intensive industries.
The math simply does not allow for a thriving manufacturing sector.
No, it doesn't.
You cannot staff a massive factory floor or send thousands of people out to manually harvest crops when your median age is steadily marching upward and your youth pool is evaporating.
You really can't. And this forces an evolutionary bottleneck.
Evolutionary bottleneck.
Yeah. When an economy faces a severe structural labor shortage, it only has a few options. It can collapse, it can automate, it can rely entirely on mass immigration to import young labor,
Right.
or it can fundamentally mutate its domestic industry. It has to pivot away from brawn and lean entirely into brains.
So it has to abandon the production of physical goods.
Exactly. And transition into generating high-value, low-friction services.
Which brings us to the second major pillar of our analysis. And honestly, perhaps the most jarring data in this entire stack.
The 90% anomaly.
Yes, if you don't have the youth to work the farms and factories, you mutate. And the Channel Islands mutated into what we can only call the 90% anomaly.
The macroeconomic transformation here is absolute.
Let's look at the GDP indicators on slide 7. The World Bank firmly classifies the Channel Islands in the high-income bracket.
Very high income.
Yeah, their GDP per capita, calculated at constant prices, floats in this incredibly rare air. We are talking between roughly 63,000 and 67,000 US dollars per person.
They are generating phenomenal wealth.
Phenomenal wealth. But the shock is how they are generating it. If we move to the stacked bar chart on slide 8, the data shows that the service sector accounts for between 90.4% and 91.7% of their total GDP.
It's almost the entire economy.
More than 9 out of every $10 generated in this economy comes from services. Meanwhile, the industrial sector has withered away to a tiny sliver, just 7.6% to 8.8%.
That ratio is staggering, and we need to be very clear about what a greater than 90% service economy actually entails.
Right, because when the average person hears service sector, they usually think of barista jobs, retail clerks, or maybe local plumbers.
Exactly. But you cannot generate $67,000 in per capita GDP by selling lattes and repairing each other's sinks.
Right, a closed loop of domestic retail doesn't generate that kind of macroeconomic wealth. You need foreign capital pouring in.
Yes. The service sector in the Channel Islands represents ultra-high value added global services.
We are talking about offshore banking.
Offshore banking, complex wealth management, corporate administration, legal structuring, and highly specialized insurance.
Okay, I want to stop you right there, because this is where economic discussions usually gloss over the reality.
Fair enough.
We hear terms like offshore finance or captive insurance, and they just sound like buzzwords. Let's actually explain the mechanics of this. How does an island actually make money doing this? Break down something like captive insurance for me. Assume I have zero background in high finance.
Okay, let's look at the mechanics. Imagine you are a massive multinational shipping company based in London.
Okay, I'm a shipping magnate.
You own hundreds of cargo ships. Now, insuring all those ships through traditional insurance companies is incredibly expensive.
How about?
You are paying massive premiums every year. So your lawyers say, why don't we just create our own insurance company solely to insure our own ships? That is a captive insurance company. It's held captive by its parent corporation.
Okay, so I want to start my own insurance subsidiary. Why do I go to Guernsey to do it instead of staying in London?
Because of the regulatory and capital environment. If you try to set up an insurance company in London, the regulators will force you to keep an enormous amount of liquid capital sitting idle in the bank.
Just in case my ships sink.
Exactly. Just in case a bunch of your ships sink at once. They treat you like a public insurance company that has to protect everyday consumers.
Ah, I see.
But Guernsey has spent decades crafting a highly specialized, incredibly efficient legal framework specifically for captive insurance.
Right.
Their regulators understand that you are only insuring yourself, so they allow you to hold far less idle capital.
which means I can invest that capital elsewhere and make more money.
Precisely. The corporate tax structures are highly favorable, and the legal establishment there is incredibly swift and experienced in international corporate law.
So the London Shipping Company sets up a brass plate office in Guernsey.
They set up the corporate entity there, but that entity needs to be managed.
Right.
It needs local directors to comply with the law. It needs specialized accountants to audit the books. It needs risk managers, compliance officers, and legal counsel.
And all of those people, the highly educated, highly paid professionals living in Guernsey, charge substantial fees for their services.
Exactly. That is how the wealth is generated. The island is providing the sophisticated legal and administrative architecture for global capital to operate more efficiently.
That makes perfect sense. So to generate that 90% of GDP, the island has essentially rewired its entire society to process information, manage risk, and administer global wealth.
It's an entire nation functioning as a highly optimized, high-end corporate campus.
There are practically no assembly lines. There are no smokestacks.
None. And this brings us to a fascinating concept in macroeconomics, the high-income steady-state oscillation.
Hold on, translation please. What does steady-state oscillation mean in this context?
It means an economy has found a highly lucrative, highly specialized niche, and it simply vibrates within that success.
Vibrates within that success. I like that.
Yeah, it isn't trying to diversify anymore.
Yeah.
It has realized that its absolute comparative advantage is in financial and administrative services.
So it just goes all in.
Completely all in. So it abandons the pretense of making its own clothes, assembling its own cars, or growing its own wheat.
Right.
The wealth generated by those armies of accountants and lawyers is so immense that they can simply buy whatever physical goods they need from the rest of the world.
But that is the terrifying catch, isn't it?
It is a massive risk.
If you generate 91% of your wealth from digital ledgers and legal briefs, you have traded self-sufficiency for absolute financial optimization.
You've traded resilience for efficiency.
Right. Think about the fragility of that. When an economy enters that 90% anomaly, they must import virtually every physical thing they touch.
Everything.
Every laptop on every desk in those banks, every server rack, every car driven on the island, every piece of building material.
And almost every single calorie of food consumed by the population.
Exactly. It all has to be brought in on a boat or a plane.
It is the ultimate external dependence. And this is the vulnerability of the hyper-specialized microstate. Their domestic resilience to physical shocks is practically zero.
So if a global supply chain breaks down, let's say there's a massive strike at the ports in the UK or France, or geopolitical crisis blocks shipping lanes, they have no domestic buffer.
Not at all.
You cannot eat bank statements.
No, you can't.
You cannot build a house out of legal compliance documents.
Huh.
They are incredibly wealthy, but if the boats stop coming, that wealth cannot be converted into immediate physical survival.
And they are equally vulnerable to regulatory shocks, too.
Oh,
What if the global consensus on corporate taxation changes? What if major economies rewrite their laws to penalize the use of offshore jurisdictions?
that would be devastating.
If the demand for that specific administrative architecture evaporates, the Channel Islands have no manufacturing base or agricultural export market to fall back on.
The traditional economic safety nets have been completely dismantled,
Yes.
which is a perfect segue into our next dimension. We've established that this is a wealthy, aging society generating massive cash through high-end cognitive work.
Right.
Now, if over 90% of the money comes from the service sector, that logically means the vast majority of the population must be doing the serving. Let's examine the labor market data on slides 9 and 10, because it tells a story of an economy that has completely filtered its workforce.
The employment shift mirrors the GDP shift almost perfectly, but the demographic nuances within the labor force, particularly regarding gender and job security, are deeply revealing.
Let's run the numbers on the sectoral shift first. Looking at slide 9, the area chart shows employment in agriculture has basically vanished,
Down to just 2.1%.
2.1%,
Yeah.
and industrial employment has shrunk from nearly 19% down to around 12.7%.
So the physical labor sectors are collapsing.
Exactly. In their place, the service sector dominates utterly, employing over 85% of the workforce.
And within that massive service workforce, the standout data point is female labor force participation.
Yeah, let's look at slide 10, the donut chart. It shows female participation has steadily risen, And women now make up about 44.7% of the total workforce.
Which is a significant shift over this time period.
Huge. And here is the kicker. An overwhelming 90.3% to 95.1% of those working women are employed specifically in the service sector.
This is a classic hallmark of a post-industrial shift, and it completely rewrites the societal gender dynamics. Well, historically, economies heavily reliant on agriculture, mining, or heavy manufacturing tend to have rigid gender divisions in labor.
Just due to the physical requirements.
Exactly, physical requirements and historical biases of those industries. But as an economy transitions into cognitive, administrative, and relational labor, those physical barriers evaporate.
The office desk is a great equalizer compared to the coal mine or the shipping dock.
Exactly. And when an economy has a structural labor shortage, which we established earlier due to the plunging birth rates, it cannot afford to leave half of its intellectual capital on the sidelines.
It needs everyone.
The integration of women into the core economic engine isn't just a cultural shift. It is a macroeconomic necessity for a society facing demographic decline.
So the modern corporate office becomes the defining arena of the society.
It does.
But let's look at the quality of these jobs.
Mhm.
Because on slide 11, the data paints a picture that might sound like an absolute utopia to listeners who are tired of the modern gig economy.
The waffle chart on the slide is really striking.
It really is. The UN tracks a metric called wage and salary workers. This essentially means formal employees. People with stable contracts, regular paychecks, legal protections, and benefits.
The standard 9 to 5 arrangement with the safety net.
Right. In the Channel Islands, this category makes up an astonishing 90% to 91.3% of the entire workforce.
It is a profoundly formalized labor market,
And it gets better. They also track vulnerable employment.
which is the informal sector.
Exactly. Precarious jobs, day laborers, unregulated gig work, people hustling without a safety net.
Yeah.
In the Channel Islands, vulnerable employment is virtually non-existent.
It hovers incredibly low.
Yeah, between just 4.2% and 5.9%. Imagine a grid of 100 workers. 91 of them have solid, secure, contracted jobs. Only about 4 or 5 represent vulnerable, informal workers.
By almost any conventional metric, that is an immaculate labor market. It implies a high degree of worker security and regulatory oversight.
Okay, I have to push back here. I have to play the skeptic for a minute, because a vulnerable employment rate of 4% sounds almost too good to be true.
Okay, I hear you.
If you look at major economies today, informal work and gig economies are exploding. People are driving Ubers, delivering food without contracts, stringing together freelance gigs just to survive.
That's the reality in most places, yes.
So why doesn't that exist in Jersey or Guernsey? Are the employers there just incredibly generous and ethically opposed to precarious work? Or is there a darker reality here? Is it a velvet rope?
A velvet rope. Unpack that for me.
What I mean is, this low vulnerable employment rate might not be a sign that poverty and precarity have been solved. It might just mean they've been priced out.
Ah,
We already established that the cost of living on these islands is astronomical. Housing is exorbitant, imported food is expensive.
right.
If you don't have a high-paying, formal desk job in finance or tech or law, you literally cannot afford to exist there. You can't just set up an unlicensed fruit stand or string together 4 informal dog-walking gigs and expect to make rent in a premier global financial hub.
The ecosystem simply filters you out.
Exactly. If you fall out of the formal economy, you likely just leave. You take the ferry back to the UK.
That is a phenomenal piece of critical analysis, and it is absolutely vital for understanding this data.
It just seemed weird to me.
No, you're spot on. A 4% vulnerable employment rate is not necessarily a reflection of a utopian social safety net. It is a reflection of a highly exclusive, hyper-expensive environment.
Right, it's not that the gig workers are being elevated into management. It's that the gig workers literally cannot afford the price of admission to the island.
Exactly. When your economic engine is built entirely on compliance, regulation, and high-end services, the jobs inherently require formal structures.
You don't hire informal day laborers to audit a hedge fund.
Or manage a captive insurance portfolio, right?
Right.
The jobs demand high education and strict legal oversight. So the economic oxygen for a hustle economy just isn't there.
It's choked out.
Yeah. The workforce is highly regularized out of sheer necessity and the brutal filtering power of the cost of living. The people who remain on the island are the ones who fit the formal, high-value structure.
It's a society of survivors. but specifically survivors who know how to use Excel and navigate corporate law.
Exact.
So we've built a very vivid mental model of this population now. We have an aging, highly educated, wealthy populace. They are sitting in formal offices doing cognitive work, generating immense digital wealth.
Right.
They have practically no factories clanging away and very few farms left to plow, which naturally leads to the next massive question.
What happens to the actual land?
Yes. What does an economy like that do to the actual physical dirt and trees of the island? What happens to the environment when the economy leaves the land behind?
This brings us to the physical footprint data on slide 12, which reveals a fascinating phenomenon of post-industrial geography.
Let's look at the land use evolution. Historically, these islands were heavily farmed.
Very heavily.
We were talking earlier off mic about the famous Guernsey tomato. In the mid-20th century, they grew and exported millions of them. The land was an economic engine.
It was their primary physical export.
But over our timeline, the data shows agricultural land slowly but noticeably decreasing. It went from covering 45.4% of the land area down to 43.2%.
It's a steady fade,
Yeah. But in tandem with that, the forest coverage has actually crept up.
which is unusual for a growing population.
Right. It grew from 4.19% to 5.15%.
Yeah.
Now, those are small percentage shifts, sure. But on micro islands where every single square meter is fiercely accounted for, a 1% increase in forest is a deliberate structural choice.
What we are seeing here is the spatial evolution of wealth.
The spatial evolution of wealth.
Yes. In a developing economy, or even a traditional industrial one, land is primarily viewed as a resource for extraction.
You clear the trees to plant crops.
Exactly, because you need to feed your population or generate export revenue. You clear more land to build factories because you need physical space to assemble goods. The land is subjugated to economic survival.
But the Channel Islands aren't doing that anymore because they are generating $67,000 per capita through fiber optic cables and server farms. They don't need the physical land to generate wealth.
Precisely. They generate enough capital through digital and cognitive means to simply offshore their physical footprint.
They just buy their tomatoes from Spain or the Netherlands.
They buy their manufactured goods from Asia or Germany. The local land is liberated from the burden of economic production.
It's like an analogy I was thinking about. Imagine you used to make a living by farming your own backyard.
Okay.
It's hard work. The yard is mostly dirt and vegetable patches, and you have some chickens to feed your family.
A subsistence model.
Right. But then you start a wildly successful online consulting business out of your spare bedroom.
Okay, I'm with you.
Suddenly, you are making incredible money just using your laptop. You no longer need that vegetable garden to survive. You don't need to harvest your own food. So what do?
You let the trees grow back.
Exactly. You let the trees grow back. You build a beautiful patio. You focus on the aesthetic and recreational value of your property because your survival is being funded through the cloud.
That aesthetic shift is exactly what the data is showing us. Even a microfractional increase in forestation on a tiny, densely populated island represents the deliberate economic abandonment of low-yield farming.
It's a choice.
It highlights the profound luxury of a high-income society. They have the economic security to prioritize environmental conservation, green spaces, and quality of life over raw agricultural subsistence.
They're rewilding the office park.
Rewilding the office park, that's a great way to put it.
Okay, I love the patio analogy, but I have to apply the same skepticism here that we applied to the labor market.
Go for it.
Is this actually a green victory? The data says the Channel Islands are slightly reforesting, which looks great on a sustainability report.
Yeah.
But aren't they just outsourcing their environmental damage?
How do you mean?
Well, the people in Jersey and Guernsey are still eating food, and probably more expensive calorie-dense food than ever before.
Oh, sure.
They are still consuming manufactured goods. If they aren't growing the food or building the goods on their own islands, the environmental cost of that consumption is just happening somewhere else.
Ah, I see what you're saying.
They get to plant trees at home and enjoy the aesthetic luxury of nature. But somewhere in a developing nation, a forest is being clear-cut to grow the soybeans or raise the cattle that the Channel Islands are importing.
Right.
It's not necessarily a net positive for the globe. It's just the privilege of offshored environmental impact.
That is an incredibly astute observation, and it touches on one of the most complex debates in global environmental economics. It is known as the pollution haven hypothesis, or the displacement of environmental load.
The displacement of environmental load.
Yes, you are absolutely right. The high-income, hyper-service economy appears remarkably clean domestically. There are no smokestacks, the water is clear, the trees are returning,
It looks pristine.
but their consumption footprint relies on a massive global supply chain that is fundamentally extractive.
They are buying the right to a pristine local environment.
Yes, they are exporting the carbon emissions and the land degradation required to sustain their high-income lifestyle. So while the local UN data shows a positive trend in forestation, the global balance sheet is far more complicated.
It's a luxury that only the wealthiest nodes in the global network can afford.
Exactly.
We have gathered some incredible clues here, and I think it is time to connect the dots and put this entire socioeconomic puzzle together. Slide 13 gives us this macrodynamic flowchart that basically summarizes everything.
The causal chain is remarkably clear when you view it from a distance.
Step 1 on the flowchart is the demographic shift. Crashing birth rates combined with soaring life expectancy creates a deeply structurally aging population.
Which triggers step 2. This demographic reality creates immense, unavoidable labor supply pressure.
Right. You suddenly have fewer young, physical bodies entering the workforce to replace the retirees.
Leading to step 3. That severe labor shortage forces the economy's hand.
Eat tabs.
It has to. It cannot sustain physical industries. It abandons labor-intensive manufacturing and agriculture, pushing all its capital and human resources into high-value-added, low-physical labor services.
It relies entirely on the brains of its citizens rather than their brawn.
And this creates a unique balance sheet for the future of the microstate, which is visualized beautifully on slide 14.
The scales.
Right. If we place the Channel Islands on a metaphorical scale, we can see the exact trade-offs of reaching this economic endgame.
So on one side of the scale, you have incredible resilience and prosperity.
Yes.
You have a highly formalized, safe labor market for those who can access it. You have immense per capita wealth, high human development, incredibly long lives, and the luxury of local environmental conservation.
But on the other side of the scale, you have acute, glaring vulnerabilities.
The dependence.
Yes. You have an intensely monochromatic economy. Everything is painted in the exact same shade of the financial service sector.
Right. If that sector hiccups.
If there is a global regulatory crackdown on offshore jurisdictions or a massive shift in how global capital moves, the islands have practically zero domestic industry to fall back on.
They are walking a very lucrative but intensely thin tightrope.
It is genuinely rare to see macroeconomic theory demonstrated so cleanly in a real-world dataset.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Usually, the causal links between an aging population and industrial composition are muddied by 100 other variables.
Like what?
Vast geographies, internal migration, natural resource discoveries. But here, the flow from an aging population to a hyper-specialized service economy is elegantly, unavoidably clear.
The data doesn't just show numbers on a page. It shows a society surviving by fundamentally mutating its purpose.
It does.
And the reason this matters to you, the listener, is because this isn't just a quirky story about two islands in the English Channel.
Not at all. As slide 15 points out in its academic wrap-up, the Channel Islands are an extreme, isolated microsample. But the exact same demographic and economic pressures are currently squeezing much of the developed world.
We are seeing the early stages of this right now in massive economies.
We absolutely are. Look at Europe, look at Japan, look at South Korea, look at parts of North America.
Yeah.
They are all facing plunging birth rates. They are all staring down the barrel of rapidly aging populations.
And they're all watching their traditional manufacturing sectors struggle as the available labor pool shrinks and ages.
Exactly. And they're all desperately trying to transition into higher value, knowledge-based services to maintain their GDP and support their retirees.
Understanding the data from the Channel Islands is essentially understanding the economic policy battles that the entire developed world will be fighting for the next half-century.
The Channel Islands just got there first.
Yeah, they hit the demographic wall decades ago, and they adapted. They are the crystal ball showing us one possible version of the future.
A wealthy, aging, service-driven future.
But with no safety net if the global supply chains freeze.
It is a blueprint of both adaptation and extreme exposure.
Well, let's briefly recap the journey we've been on today. We started by looking at a population where the birth rate was essentially halved.
Driven by the intense costs of housing and professional life.
Right, while lifespans soared past 80 years. This created the demographic scissors, where the elderly outnumbered the youth.
Which fundamentally changed what the economy could do.
Right. We saw how that lack of physical labor forced the creation of a 90% service anomaly. an economy generating staggering wealth through offshore finance, captive insurance, and administration.
While completely abandoning factories and farms.
We explored the immaculate but highly exclusionary labor market, where informal gig work is essentially priced out of
The
existence.
velvet rope.
And finally, we saw the luxurious, yet globally complex, return of the island's forests, as the need for physical land utilization was outsourced to the rest of the world.
It is a complete socioeconomic transformation, the biography of an economy completely reinvented.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to ponder. Something that isn't written in the historical data from 1960 to 2024, but is staring us in the face right now.
Oh.
The Channel Islands survived the decline of agriculture and manufacturing by pivoting entirely to human brain services. They traded muscle for mind.
Right.
They built an empire on administration, financial compliance, legal analysis, and wealth management.
Cognitive labor became their only export.
Exactly. But what happens to a 90% service economy, populated mostly by the elderly, in the age of generative AI?
Oh, wow. That is the existential question for the knowledge economy.
Think about it. Tractors and global supply chains replaced the physical farm work, so they pivoted to the office. But if algorithms and artificial intelligence can automate the drafting of legal briefs, the auditing of captive insurance subsidiaries, and the massive data analysis required for wealth management.
What is the next mutation?
Exactly. What is the next mutation for an economy like this? Where does a society pivot when the brain work, their absolute last remaining comparative advantage, is outsourced to machines?
That's a chilling thought, honestly.
The data has shown us the anatomy of a fully matured post-industrial economy, but the diagnosis for its future in the AI era, well, that remains to be seen.
It definitely does.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Channel Islands data. We hope this exploration helps you look at the macro trends and maybe the trajectory of your own country's economy a little differently today. Keep questioning the numbers, keep looking for the why behind the what, and we will catch you next time.